guys, I'm Joseph and welcome to another episode of Speakeasy. Today we are going to go over the top half of a debate, meaning the Prime Minister, Leader of Op, and the Deputy speeches. The four speeches in top half can broadly be split into PM and LO, the first speeches on the one hand, and the two Deputy speeches on the other. Let's start with the first speeches because I like keeping things chronological. The job of the first speeches, and the PM in particular, is to set up the debate. This boils down to framing the debate, presenting a model, and explaining your sacrificial lamb. While there exist nuances in how to set up a debate effectively depending on the motion type, we are going to go over those specifics in a later episode. For now, let's assess these three concepts more generically. What is framing? Framing is an academic term for putting things in context. It explains what the world looks like in a generic and supposedly neutral manner. It serves purely as an explanation for what reality looks like for relevant actors or locations, ideally already kind of giving off a vibe of something must be done here. It establishes what matters to the debate, what doesn't, and that something must be done. Let's do an example. Say the motion is about whether feminists in Islamic countries should try to abolish religious laws discriminating against women rather than pushing for changes of these laws. This was actually a motion set at a very large competition. Now, let's say you need to defend abolishing these laws. Seems pretty drastic, right? Especially from a group of individuals that, according to the premise of the motion, are experiencing discrimination by law. So, what to do? Easy. You frame who matters in this debate in terms of how political change happens by defining different relevant stakeholders. First, you have the general population, among which there are many potential allies with aligning goals. For instance, maybe there are young people in general who would like access to alcohol or other liberties that might be being denied to them. Perhaps there are liberals who just generally believe that society should be freer. People who would reject a feminist push to abolish these kinds of laws are also likely hardline conservatives who would probably also oppose any change whatsoever, so they're kind of symmetric on both sides of the debate. Second, you have politicians who presumably would like to expand their personal power relative to that of religious institutions confining them. They would therefore have much greater incentive to help feminists abolish religious law outright than they do to change it. Third, and most critically, you have the people currently deciding these laws. Who are they more likely to listen to? Some young person coming to them and telling them their lifelong studies of ancient religious texts are wrong and that the modern feminist interpretation is actually correct and they should bend to you because you're a feminist? Or someone who says that, look, I get it, you've got this stuff down, and you know your shit, and those who want to live by those rules should live by them, but we don't want to, so how can we compromise? Notice how the latter is far less likely to be insulting to that cleric's competence and far more likely to yield policy change, if policy change is even possible at all. Because if there's nothing that could sway a cleric, then both sides have no impact, so this debate is clearly about the likelihood of change. And that's the point of framing. Explaining the realities on the ground to make your side and your arguments seem more favorable to the judge's ear. Ideally, every team in the debate should choose to frame their case, to explain why their argument is persuasive given the underlying context of the debate. But it is critically important if you're PM or LO. Generally, framing also highlights why we care about the motion in the first place, which is especially important when you're OG, because you don't want the opposition to get away with saying, this debate just doesn't solve anything worth solving. Now that we've established what framing is, what is a model? A model is essentially how you would implement something. While this is only relevant to debates that actually ask you to pass a policy, the majority of debates do require you to do this in some capacity. Even motions that don't have explicit policies attached to them usually benefit from having you explain what the likeliest implementation of that policy would be. There are really only two things to understand about modeling in general. The first is fiat. This refers to how much capital, be it financial, political, or social, your policies require to be enacted. This is important to understand because however many resources you use, the other side gets the same amount to solve whatever problem you identify in this debate. The second thing you need to understand about modeling is that your model also needs to be within the realm of the possible, meaning you cannot fiat in hypothetical future technology that could solve everything, as doing that would break the underlying premise of the debate. If the opposition agrees that your problem is worth solving, they may offer what is called a counter-proposition, meaning they concede the underlying issue in its entirety, but offer an alternative solution. For this to be legal, from OO, their proposal must be mutually exclusive with the solution of OG. You cannot just offer an alternative that could be done in addition to what the Prime Minister suggested be done. Just two important notes about models. Only the Prime Minister may model. Only the leader of the opposition may challenge the model or propose a counterprop. Closing opposition can ask clarifications or POIs, but the only speaker that can actively make a challenge to a model is the LO. Closing government and DPM may not offer a completely new model, even if the Prime Minister fucked up. That would be knifing and is therefore disregarded. The only exception is if OG does not offer a model, OO challenges them on the lack of model, and DPM does not fill it in with likelihood analysis. In this specific case, CG may offer what would be a likely implementation of the policy to add clarity to the debate. Secondly, the PM may not squirrel the debate. Squirreling refers to giving a definition of the debate that is intentionally smaller in scale than the motion requires for them to defend in order to eliminate certain arguments from the debate. For example, if a motion says the word all in it, and the PM only defends the debate in one specific instance, they are squirreling and can and should be called out on this by the LO. There are other examples of this, but generally speaking, just take a definition that makes sense. The final thing the PM and LO want to do before getting to their argument is what is called the sacrificial lamb. This refers to an anecdote about how to conceptualize debating in general. In biblical times, our ancestors supposedly slaughtered animals to gain rain. They had to give up something to gain something. This is a fundamental aspect of debating as well. The people who set the motion that you're debating presume that both sides could win. That means both sides need to have benefits and both sides need to have drawbacks. What you want to do is assess what it is you're sacrificing on your side of the debate, as well as what you're gaining, and then explain why that trade-off is worth it. In practice, this means explaining that your lamb is either very small and sick and insignificant, or that you don't kill the lamb but are merely chopping off a leg and still retain most of the lamb. At the same time, you want to explain that your land is dry and it hasn't rained in many months, and that without a downpour, all your lambs will die anyways, so the sacrifice is worth it. Now, how do you as PM know what your rain is? Easy. That's what you're claiming changes for the better if the motion passes. That's your gain. Your lamb, on the other hand, is trickier. It requires you to carefully consider what the likely best cases for the other side are and explain why giving up whatever opposition gets at their best is worth it. Let's do a quick example. Let's say you want to implement CCTV in public spaces everywhere. What you would want to claim as gain is probably something about security improving for the population in some capacity. You are hopefully also aware that, to some extent, you are now constantly observing your population at large and infringing on their privacy and treating them as potential suspects. So, what to do? Well, we start by explaining that some bad stuff has been going on and that our police is understaffed and overworked and could really use the extra resources, and that CCTV essentially allows them to consolidate their resources by having fewer people watch over more space. Simultaneously, most people carry listening devices with them willingly and sign away their rights of privacy willy-nilly without even reading the terms of service of large faceless corporations that are using their data for God knows what. We are not even suggesting setting this up in people's homes, just public sphere, which is already separate from the private sphere anyways, so we are not fully giving up that right regardless. Actively explaining your reign and your lamb serves as a powerful tool to explain why you win the debate and why your policy is worth implementing even though there are negatives. Your acknowledgement of these downsides and consideration and explanation for why giving them up is okay sets you up as a very tough team to beat in the debate. It is critical for you to understand that your lamb is the other side's reign, because by explaining what you gain, you also explain what they're giving up. That covers the semi-unique aspects of PM and LO. Let's now look at the deputy speakers. There are broadly 3 things a deputy speech does: rebuild, rebut, and do your best to knock out the back half. The first thing a good deputy wants to do is assess where their partner's case has been attacked and see if it still stands fully or not. If it does, then no worries. You can try to think where it could be attacked in a later speech if you're worried it could be beaten in rebuttal and fill in some of those links. If your first speaker was flawless, you can kind of skip this step. But as one second speaker to another, in my experience, first speakers are rarely flawless. Basically, look at the core elements from episode 2 on how to build an argument and see where there are deficits, either because of your first speaker messing up or because the other side poked holes in it with rebuttal. Additionally, if you think the other side's rebuttal is bad or untrue, then treat it just like any other argument and go rebut their rebuttal. The second thing a good deputy does is rebut. It is your job to knock down the other side as much as you can, just as your PM or LO build up your side of the debate. In other words, you both want to keep your sandcastle standing and kick over the other kid's castle as much as you can. We've dedicated the entirety of episode 3 to this, so if you have questions about rebuttal, please review that episode. There's really not much more to say about these 2 points, as we've discussed most of your relevant work here in previous episodes, so let's skip ahead to the point that's actually interesting: killing back half. For simplicity's sake, let's split these into killing your own closing and killing the team on the diagonal, even though the strategies are fairly similar. To deal with your own closing, there are a couple of strategies you can employ. The easiest is to select the best case, explain why it wins the debate, and leave no gaps to be filled. If you do this, your closing is not allowed to knife you explicitly, can't rebut you, and has a duty to provide new material, so if you're already winning the most important argument in the room, they cannot beat you. Unfortunately for you, there usually is more than one very good case per side, and you cannot always fully predict the best case for the debate. Unless you're quite confident in your ability to establish what wins the debate, here's a little bit of a cheap trick to take them out. You can try to turf burn, which means you cover as much material as possible so that the team extending off of you has a very difficult time finding new material. If they flag their extension in a point of information to your immediate opposite team in top half, you can see what case they want to run and steal it too. To be clear, if you have not thought of their extension at all before it has been POI'd, it's highly unlikely that you'll be able to steal their extension in about a minute or 2 tops. And running it poorly might be a significantly worse use of your time than running something else well. Now, I'm also not saying just throw out a million lines that might stick, because then any one of those arguments would be very easily filled in analytically by closing to take it away from you. Instead, you want to make a few technically complete arguments with a sufficient level of explanation and impacting to make it very difficult to steal them. Especially in a debate that has little material for each side, this can be a killer move to knock out the team extending off of you. However, do not do this at the expense of being comprehensible. Remember, if you speak at Mach 10 and the judges cannot keep up with you, you're unpersuasive and you'll lose. Now, the best way to deal with teams on the diagonal is actually the same as your closing. Just be really solid and explain why you win the debate in a vacuum. Sometimes that won't be enough though, and you might not have the best read on what opposition teams might do. For those times, points of information are your best friends. You want to listen to what the other team asks your first speaker and carefully consider what they might run. When they ask you a POI, you want to be listening carefully and try to be as responsive as you can be on the fly. Additionally, you want to be as generous as humanly possible in assuming the extent to which they will prove their claims, because you cannot know how strong they will actually be before it's their turn to speak. In other words, assume the worst, assume they're very good, and rebut the absolutely strongest version of what they are likely to run, because besides at most 2 POIs, you're not really going to get a chance to respond to them later. Now then, let's make a quick checklist to make sure you caught everything. Today, we went over what role fulfillment for the 4 speeches in top half looks like. We learned the concepts of framing, modeling, and strategic concessions through trade-offs. Finally, we looked at the ways deputies can secure the win for their team by rebuilding their team's case, offering rebuttal to the other side, and defeating the back half before they even got up to say anything. Alright guys, that is all for now. I hope you learned something, and if you have any questions, put them in the comments below or write to us on Twitter @SpeakEasyDebate. And if you liked this episode, please share it with your friends or other debaters you know who might be interested in this series. As always, you can find the cheat sheet for this week on our website, speakeasydebating.wordpress.com. You can also find the cheat sheets for previous episodes here, as well as motions from competitions that we track. For now, have a nice week, and I'll see you next time.